5 channel members and patrons: Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Sergeant Puma, Cat Crab Lobster, and Duck Machine. Thank you very much for the support. It is much appreciated. The Warrior Caste, written by IAreGoodAtRighting. The Montidian carrier deaccelerated as it entered high orbit above the planet. Vast blue oceans and lush green continents drifting underneath the ship. Within its hull, thousands of insectoids prepared for battle. The battle master stood on the bridge, glaring at the worker caste on their monitors. Each one's face was glued to a screen, claws blurred at a speed as they typed. "If this turns out to be another false alarm," he let the crew finish that threat in their heads. "Our data is coming in. Looks like the preliminary scans were correct this time, Battlemaster," Beyond said from behind one of the screens. "There's sentient life down there." The Battlemaster quivered with joy. "It has been too long since we found out the sentients. It'll be a delight to wipe them out. I will prepare the landing party." "Shouldn't we alert the other carriers before landing? Protocol says..." "I don't care what the protocol says." Battlemaster outburst caused the worker Mantodian to duck behind his monitor. "It's been months since the warrior caste spilled blood, you know. I'm not about to let some soft-skinned Battlemaster steal all the glory." He stomped towards the petrified worker. Crew members in his path scurried out of the way. "The longer we go without getting, the shorter our tempers get." The Battlemaster shadow engulfed the worker at his console. With one claw, he grasped the quaking peon by its neck, pulling him out of the seat and into the air. "Who do you serve? Me or some words in a book?" "You," the worker choked out in between breaths. The Battlemaster stared at the other Mantodian voice, contorting in pain and fear. "I'd kill you if your job weren't so important." Releasing his grip, the Battlemaster watched the worker fall back onto the bridge, gasping for air on the ground. He swung his head to the rest of the room. The rest of the workers ripped their eyes from the spectacle and continued clicking away on their monitors as soon as they caught his gaze. He let out a satisfied grunt and marched out of the room. "What do you think we'll find out there? Acid-spitting birds, oversized reptiles?" Skithit asked the rest of the warriors gathered in a circle. Mantodian warriors packed the floor of the hangar and flooded around the drop pods. Every few minutes, a fresh wave of torpor chambers would fire in and find their places. "Don't be stupid," Tick scoffed, pointing at the giant screen on one wall masquerading as a window. "See all of that water? It's another amphibious race. Why do you care anyways?" He extended his claw and poked at Skithit's chitinous breastplate. "You're scared of some primates." Skithit smacked the claw away. "No." "Are you sure? I think you have a worker pretending to be a warrior here." Crude laughter erupted from the circle. "But I can kill twice as many as you." "Oh!" Tick looked at the other warriors in faint surprise. "Big words from the rookie." He moved forward and leaned up to Skithit's face. "Is that a challenge?" Internally, Skithit was kicking himself for reacting to Tick's taunting. But everyone was watching, and it was in too deep to back out. "It is." The other warriors in the circle cheered them on. Tick opened his mouth to say some insult when the racket of 1,000 different conversations going on at once died down to silence. Following the eyes of the rest of the crowd, Skithit saw the Battlemaster step into the room. His towering form dwarfed every other Mactodian in the room. He was decorated with skeletal trophies from at least a dozen different races. The Mactodians bowed their heads in reverence. "Arise, honored members of the warrior class!" His words thundered across the enormous room. The crowd followed his command. "For centuries we have expanded across the galaxy, not once encountering a race who could travel the stars like us. Clearly we were chosen by the powers that be to have eternal rule over the universe." The hacker nodded and muttered back in agreement. "However, your universe is filled with weeds." He glared at the screen on the wall. Another race of primitives infest the world below us, and I mean to put an end to that. Greed and conquest fill their savage hearts as they look to the stars. If these weeds are allowed to grow and break free from the shackles of their earth, who knows what trouble they might cause in the future. So once again, the mighty warrior caste will go on the hunt. I will not rest until the last weed has been torn from this planet. The Mentodians jeered back in response. To your droplets! The bodies in the hangar shifted like a changing tide. Skithid followed the wave until he found himself climbing into one of the long, corkscrew-shaped vessels. He groaned as Tick followed him inside not long after. The ships were remotely operated by the worker caste on the carrier. That was made apparent by the lack of cockpit or anything else inside besides shock-absorbing seats. By the time Skithid finished strapping himself in, several more warriors entered and the doors closed behind them. The time between loading and takeoff gave him time to breathe, though he never would admit it out loud. There was a sliver of truth to Tick's jibes. This was his first extermination run. He couldn't help but feel a little nervous. A quick look at the other warriors and their excited expressions helped calm his nerves. Let us hope that these savages put up as much fight as the last ones, one said to the delight of others. The shining white lights inside the craft went out, replaced by a single red warning light in the center of the room. A whirring sound started to wind up and the opposite end of the entrance. Skithid felt himself get pushed down into the seat as the craft rose from the hangar floor. He pulled on the seat's harness one last time. Happy hunting, boys! Don't soil yourself, Skithid! Tick called from the few seats down. Before Skithid got a chance to fire back, the drop pod's engines kicked to full blast. He molded with the seat of his chair, and the ship shot out of the hangar and towards the planet's surface. The rumbling of engines quieted down, and he pushed himself off of the absorber. Instead of sinking back into his seat, he floated around, only kept in place by his harness. It felt like his insides were being rearranged. He fought back a wave of nausea. Then it felt like the drop pod hit a concrete wall. Skithid slammed into the other side of the shock absorber. The craft shook and rattled like some giant was trying to liquefy the inhabitants. Gravity pulled towards the nose of the pod, pointing down towards the planet. The engines engaged, though this time to slow the ship down. They didn't come anywhere close to deaccelerating the ship to a safe speed. His claws gripping hard on the metal handles, they wouldn't break as hard as he squeezed. The voice of a worker Mentodian sounded over the rumbling of engines and the air whistling past the fuselage. Brace for impact! Brace for impact! Mentodians hunched into their seats. Skithid shut his eyes and clenched his mandibles. The drop pod impaled itself into the earth. Metal screeched and wailed. Only the shock-absorbing seats stopped the momentum from turning the warriors into two-dimensional objects. Skithid peeled himself from his outline in the cushion. Opening his eyes, there was only darkness. I'm blind! Nope. Tick's voice cut through the back. Just stupid. The entrance towards the rear of the ship opened up, a shaft of sunlight illuminating the inside of the dropship. Mentodians were unstrapping themselves and climbing upwards towards the light. Skithid cursed and tore off the straps, ignoring Tick snickering from behind. He climbed the steep slope to the floor and pushed through the exit. Around the smoking remains of the pod was a mysterious alien landscape. Green foliage covered the ground and sprouted from the tops of brown trees. Small, feathered birds and furry mammals watched the emerging Mentodians with suspicion, darting away when a warrior got too close. The serenity of the forest was broken by a tearing noise in the sky. Looking up, hundreds of drop pods filled the blue sky, streaking downward from space. Enough standing around, people! Tick pointed to the pods in the sky. Unless you want them all to kill our primitives for us. They pounded their claws against the chests and began the hunt. In the time since the landing, several more pods linked up with the group, fanning out and trying to catch any signs of sentience. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for. Kneeling beside a creek were two primitives. Skithert was sure of it. He kneeled behind a rock and watched the things move. One crouched on its knees, filling up a container with water. The other was bathing in a deeper part of the creek. They were speaking in some odd, primitive language. A shape moved in the corner of Skithert's eye. Swinging his hand around, he saw another Mentodian scanning the ground for tracks not long off. Gently pinching the rock between his claws, he tossed it towards the other warrior. The rock landed on the Mentodian's legs. He jumped and glared towards Skithert. Catching the warrior's gaze, Skithert beckoned him closer. "What are—" Skithert motioned him to silence and pointed at the primitive. The warrior followed the direction of the claw until he saw what was next to the water. Creeping towards Skithert's rock, the warrior spoke in a hushed tone. "Those are savages, all right. What are you waiting for? Looking for natural defenses. Do you see any?" The warrior watched the primitives again. No claws. Mouths too small to have dangerous fangs. No exoskeleton. Maybe they spit fire or poison. That's what I'm thinking. Let's move around and attack from A roar echoed beside the two. Tick emerged from the forest, charging towards the primitives with claws raised in the air. Looking up at Tick, the two shrieked and looked on in terror. Skithert watched in anticipation, waiting for the savages to reveal the secrets upon Tick. Instead, they turned and ran down the path at a pathetic speed. Tick closed the distance in seconds. He sunk his claws into the first one's squishy torso, red blood spilling from the wounds. Before it hit the ground, Tick dashed to the second one, ending it with a vertical swipe. Skithert and the warrior emerged from the rock. Other Mentodians trickled in moments later. The two primitives lay face down in the dirt, pools of blood forming around their bodies. Tick caught sight of Skithert and laughed. 2-0. You have some catching up to do. The Mentodians followed the tracks to a small village. The inhabitants put up as much fight as the first two sentients. Skithert watched as scattered bodies in awe. It was like these primitives had no concept of war. Sure, a few tried fighting back, but their soft appendages were no match against the exoskeletons of the Mentodians. After one last sweep for survivors, the party of warriors followed the road to the next village. There, Skithert conceded to the fact that these people were completely defenseless. Even the worker castes could put up more resistance than these savages. Weeks passed. Warriors from the rest of the drop pods joined the slaughter. The battle master himself took charge. Skithert noticed that he already made a necklace of primitive heads, linked together by the strange hair on the top of their heads. With their numbers consolidated, the Mentodian horde numbered in the thousands, swallowing hamlets and villages within minutes. A line of blood and ruin cut through the countryside. Initially, Skithert was afraid that he wouldn't get a single kill. After destroying dwelling after dwelling, though, he felt like he was invincible. Oddly enough, he noticed the populations of sentients thinning out before the warriors arrived. As he moved through the hilly landscapes with the army, Tick approached him from further behind. "How many?" he asked. "What?" Skithert said. "How many have you killed so far?" Tick repeated. 82.5, Skithert said with an air of pride. "Rookie numbers! I already got—" "Wait a minute. You can't get half a kill. You weren't there, you see. I had this one primitive cornered in a hut, when all of a sudden—" Skithert stopped when he saw the next ridgeline. "When all of a sudden—" "What?" "What are they doing up there?" Skithert and Tick looked to the top of the hill. Mentodians stopped moving forward and instead gathered around and watched something on the other side of the ridge. Battlemaster, usually at the front of the formation, stood amongst the crowd, glowering ahead. "You can guess all you want down here. I'm going up to take a look." Tick sped up the sloping hill towards the mob of warriors. Skithert shook his head and followed after Tick. A wall of bodies he couldn't look over blocked the view, pushing and shoving their way towards the front, and the two saw what was so interesting. The hill leveled out into a flat plain of cultivated land, with forest on each side. On the opposite end stood another horde. It wasn't a mass of Mentodians, but of primitives. "Skithert, I think both of our kill counts just got a lot higher today." The primitives on the other end held long wooden sticks and other objects, standing in tightly packed groups. Banners of all shapes and colors waved amongst their army, the most numerous one being a black bird with a yellow background. Mentodians all across the ridge began jeering and taunting across the field, pounding their claws against the hardened chests. The primitives responded with silence. "Warriors!" The battlemaster's voice boomed across the field. "Charge!" A single Mentodian took a step forward, and another, and another. And within moments, thousands of the warriors were charging across the open plain. Skithert's legs kicked into motion almost subconsciously. As he ran, the steady formation ahead became clearer. The primitives wore shiny metallic clothing on top of their soft skin. On top of that, the wooden rods they carried were topped off with sharp metal points and other threatening shapes. The world shook with the thundering of Mentodian feet. Skithert waited for his primitives to break and run like the rest. Instead, an endless amount of small, thin objects shot out from behind the front line. He looked to his battle-hardened brothers, though it seemed that they were confused as he was. Arcing through the air and onto the warriors, Skithert found out what the objects were. Thin twigs with metal points rained down on Mentodians. He flinched as one landed on his head and deflected off the chitin. Warriors all around him tried unsuccessfully to dodge the sharp rain. The smallest ones raised their thick claws above their heads to act as a shield. Skithert clenched his mandibles when a raindrop hit his claw at the wrong angle and cracked the chitin. Behind him, Tick roared in pain. Skithert looked back just in time to see him tearing one of the sharp objects from the exposed inside of his elbow. The battlemaster's size made him an easy target. Somehow, the savages realized his size and adornments made him important, and they focused many of their falling twigs on him. Most bounced off his exoskeleton, but a dozen or so punched through, not like the battlemaster noticed. The charge did not slow, the savages only moments away from being annihilated. When the Mentodians got close, the primitives lowered their wooden poles until the metal joints were aimed directly at them. See the danger, Skithert skidded to a halt moments before making contact. "I knew you were a coward," Tick said as he pushed Skithert aside and ran in front of him. Realizing what Skithert was trying to avoid, Tick tried to stop. He would have succeeded if the Mentodian didn't accidentally barrel into Skithert from behind. Skithert was shoved into Tick's back. Tick didn't have time to scream before he got impaled on 3 or 4 primitive wood and metal spikes. Similar stories happened all across the Mentodian charge. The front ranks tried to push backwards against the direction of the weapons, while thousands of charging warriors unknowingly shoved them back into their deaths. With nowhere to go but forward, Skithert attacked. His first target was one of the primitives still struggling to pull the weapon free from Tick's body. The others had struck him yanked in opposite directions, propping up the corpse like some twisted puppet. As Skithert moved in, long, reaching sticks from the second and third ranks of the primitive formation poked at his exoskeleton. Swatting the points away, he lunged at the thing's torso with a claw. It saw the danger too late to react, only able to shout something in its native language as a sharp claw wrapped around his chest. Skithert squeezed, expecting to tear the primitive in two like all the rest. Instead, the metal fought back against his grip, denting against the force of his grip. Other primitives saw their comrade in trouble and started poking at him with the sharp sticks until he fell back out of range. He cursed and looked at the little chips and cracks in the metal points had made in his exoskeleton. Another arc of flying twigs sailed overhead and landed somewhere behind him. As more pained screaming echoed from the back, a terrifying realization hit Skithert. All the primitives he, Tick, and the rest of the Mentodians killed were part of the worker class. He shuddered as he watched the primitives hold back the Mentodian charge. This was the warrior class. They even evolved to have metal exoskeletons. Looking down the battle line, Skithid clenched his mandibles hard. The Mantodian attempt to break past the wall of sticks was pitiful. All they could do was bat away the prodding points before eventually getting pushed too close and dying. The Battlemaster's mammoth figure would be made out from anywhere on the battlefield. Each swipe of his claw tore a dozen screaming savages into the air, but it looked like even he was slowing down. A constant barrage of speeding twigs made his entire front side look like the back of a porcupine. Meanwhile, blood oozed from places where the humans holding the sharp rods pierced his chitin. Skithid was fighting a losing battle, and he didn't bother sticking around to end up like the rest. Turning around, he forced his way through the crowd of warriors, pretending to be more injured than he was. The other warriors cleared a narrow path for the wounded comrade. "Damn Tick! Damn Battlemaster! Damn these warriors, savages!" Skithid cursed and spat as he neared the end of the Methodian army. He looked around, trying to plan his escape without being spotted. Most of the warriors back here were either dead or too busy trying to pull the falling twigs out of their chitin. The forests on either side of the battle looked like they could conceal him if he made a break for it. He picked a side and ran. Taking a look back, a few Mantodians saw him running and looked like they were about to chase after him. Their angry expressions were replaced with shock as another wave of sharp twigs landed on their backs, getting them or wounding them too badly to run. Breathing a sigh of relief, he continued towards the forest. Halfway between the clashing warrior caste and the trees, he stopped. There was a noise in the air. It wasn't the wind, the animals, or even the shouts and cries of the battle. It almost sounded like the never-ending thunderclouds from home. He felt it shaking the ground a moment later. Looking back to the battle, the warriors hadn't seemed to notice. The forest exploded with the crashing sound of hooves and shouting. Skithid stared in awe as a wall of primitives riding four-legged animals broke through the trees. Metal covered the primitives from head to toe, obscuring all their features. Even the animals they rode were covered in cloth and steel. In each rider's hand was another long, sharp stick or other weapon made of metal. They moved tremendously faster than any Mantodian Skithid had known, and they were heading right towards him. The sight looked like it stretched on forever in each direction. One of the riders lowered its stick at Skithid's chest and charged forward. Skithid tried to step out of the way at the last moment, but the primitive anticipated the move and shifted his weapon to the side in response. Wood and steel pierced Skithid's chest, the force of the impact pulverizing his chitin. The shaft went all the way through and broke through the exoskeleton on his back before snapping off into splinters. He grunted and fell at his back, clutching at the wound with his claws. Hooves trampled over him, the weight of the animal and rider stomping craters into his body. The last thing he saw before the world went black was a storm of riders smashing against the panicking Mantodians. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you